just slid a handwritten note into my husband's hand while he was clinking wine glasses with his 24-year-old assistant at our favorite downtown steakhouse, and the look on his face told me he knew his comfortable life was officially over. Some people might say a betrayed wife should scream, cause a scene, or immediately throw a drink in her husband's face to defend her honor. But is it wrong that I chose to stay completely silent, smiling at them from the shadows, knowing that my quiet calculation would destroy his reputation far more permanently than any public meltdown ever could? My husband, Julian, thought I was 300 miles away in Chicago attending a corporate legal seminar, but I had actually canceled my flight the moment his assistant's corporate credit card statement flagged a reservation for a private, candlelit booth for two. Julian always prided himself on being the sharpest corporate defense attorney in the city, a man who never left a paper trail, yet he completely forgot that I am the one who manages the family office and approves every single expense report his firm generates. He sat there looking effortlessly handsome in his tailored charcoal suit, laughing at something she said, totally unaware that the silver pen in his jacket pocket was the exact one I used to sign the asset transfer documents earlier that afternoon. The girl, Chloe, was wearing a diamond pendant that looked suspiciously expensive, the exact kind of expensive that usually requires a signature from a joint bank account. But the real twist was not that Julian was spending our money on his mistress. The real twist was that the diamond pendant actually belonged to my grandmother, taken straight out of our safe deposit box 3 weeks ago. As I watched him lean in to whisper something in his ear, I didn't feel my heart break. Instead, I felt a cold, sharp focus take over my entire body. I walked past their table so smoothly that only the faint scent of my perfume caught his attention, and as my hand brushed his shoulder, I slipped the folded piece of heavy cardstock directly into his palm. Julian looked up, his eyes widening in pure horror as his fingers closed around the paper, realizing his perfect secret was shattered. He didn't stand up, and he didn't call my name. He just sat frozen as Chloe asked him what was wrong, his face turning an ashen gray that made his expensive tan look completely fake. The note didn't say, "I know," or "we are over," because those words are too simple for a man who thinks he can argue his way out of any courtroom disaster. The note simply contained a single account balance number alongside the words, "Thanks for signing the power of attorney paperwork before I left for my trip." His fingers trembled so violently that the crystal wine glass he was holding slipped completely out of his hand, smashing against the table and splashing dark red liquid all over Chloe's white silk dress. Chloe shrieked, grabbing a handful of napkins to dab at the stain, but Julian didn't even look at her or offer to help. His eyes were glued to the restaurant's exit, tracking my shadow as I walked out into the cool evening air, knowing that every dollar he had spent the last 10 years hiding in offshore shells had just been legally moved into a trust fund under my maiden name. He thought he had been clever by slowly funneling money into a boutique real estate holding company over the past 2 years, preparing for the day he would leave me with nothing but a depreciating suburban house. What he didn't realize was that the real estate broker he was using to buy those secret properties was my first cousin, who had been sending me copies of the deeds the exact same day they were signed. I stepped into the waiting car outside the restaurant, pulling the door shut with a solid, satisfying thud that felt like a judge's gavel closing a case. My phone began to buzz in my hand, Julian's name flashing across the screen over and over again. But I didn't answer. Instead, I blocked his number and dialed my lawyer. "It's done," I whispered into the receiver. "He just dropped the glass, and now it's time to empty the house." What would you do if you caught your partner red-handed in the middle of a perfect lie? Would you cause a scene right there, or would you play the long game like I did? If you want to see exactly how Julian reacts when he realizes just how deep this trap goes, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video right now so you don't miss a single part of this unfolding story. By the time Julian managed to extricate himself from the chaotic restaurant scene and rush back to our gated estate in the suburbs, the entire driveway was lined with three professional moving trucks. Julian pulled his sports car onto the grass, slamming the door so hard the alarm chirped, running up the brick steps only to find the massive mahogany front doors wide open. The grand foyer, which usually featured a stunning collection of 19th century oil paintings and an antique Persian rug, was completely stripped down to the bare hardwood floors. Every single piece of furniture that my family money had purchased over our 12-year marriage was already wrapped in heavy moving blankets and stacked inside the trucks. Julian stormed into the living room, his chest heaving as he confronted the team of movers, shouting that they were stealing his property and that he was a senior partner at a major law firm. The lead mover didn't even look up from his clipboard. He just handed Julian a certified copy of the court-approved emergency asset separation order that my legal team had secured at 4 o'clock that afternoon. Julian's voice tightened as he read the document, his eyes scanning the judge's signature, realizing that his own firm's malpractice insurance policy had been listed as a guarantee against any assets he tried to hide. He thought he was the only one who knew how to manipulate the local family court system, but he forgot that my father was the retired Chief Justice who had appointed half the judges currently sitting on the bench. He pulled out his phone to call his managing partner, desperate to find a loophole or get an injunction to stop the trucks from moving. But before he could even dial the number, the screen lit up with an incoming email from the firm's executive committee notifying him that his senior partnership status had been placed on immediate administrative suspension pending an internal investigation into the unauthorized use of client funds for personal hotel stays. He let out a dry, rattling sound from the back of his throat, dropping his hands to his sides as he realized his career was crumbling faster than his marriage. He walked slowly into the kitchen, looking for a glass of water, but the custom refrigerator was gone, leaving nothing but an empty alcove and a single set of keys resting on the granite island counter. He walked over and picked them up, his heart sinking as he recognized the leather tag from the luxury apartment complex downtown where he had secretly leased a penthouse for Chloe using the firm's account. He assumed I found out about the apartment through a private investigator or a leaked text message on his laptop, but the truth was much simpler. The developer who built that luxury high-rise was none other than my childhood best friend's husband, who had personally called me the second Julian walked into the leasing office with Chloe on his arm. Julian threw the keys across the room, watching them slide into the dark corner of the empty kitchen, his mind racing to find a way to salvage his reputation. He knew that if the news of his suspension and his affair leaked to the local business journal, his career in corporate law would be totally finished, and no firm in the state would ever hire him. He heard a soft footsteps behind him and whirled around, expecting to see me standing there to deliver the final blow. But instead, he was met by two uniformed sheriff's deputies who stepped into the kitchen, their expressions completely neutral as they held up a paper document. "Julian Vance?" the older deputy asked, his hand resting casually on his belt. "You've been served with a temporary restraining order, and you need to vacate this property immediately. The trap is closing in on Julian, and he's losing everything he used to control everyone around him. Do you think he deserves to lose his career along with his marriage, or has the revenge gone too far? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends to see how the next twist unfolds. Julian spent the night in a cheap motel on the edge of the city, too ashamed to go to Chloe's apartment, and too broke to check into a luxury hotel since his corporate cards were entirely frozen. He sat on the edge of the squeaking mattress, staring at the peeling wallpaper, trying to understand how a man of his intelligence had been completely outmaneuvered by a woman he considered a simple housewife. The red glare of the motel clock illuminated the room, casting a harsh light over the stack of legal documents he had thrown on the bedside table. He began to realize that this wasn't a sudden reaction to his affair. This was a meticulous, months-long operation that had been executed with surgical precision. As he flipped through the pages of the restraining order, he found an attached exhibit that made his blood run cold. A complete log of his private text messages spanning the last 8 months. It wasn't just a few incriminating photos, it was a detailed record of every promise he had made to Chloe about how he was going to strip me of my inheritance before filing for divorce. He used an encrypted messaging app that promised total privacy, believing that no one could ever access the server or decrypt the files without his face identification lock. What he didn't know was that the IT company his law firm hired to upgrade their secure network last summer was owned by a firm where my younger brother was the principal partner. Every single backup of his secure phone had been automatically routed to a private server in Switzerland that my legal team had been monitoring since October. Julian rubbed his face with both hands, feeling the rough stubble on his jaw, realizing that every sweet thing he had whispered to me over the dinner over the last half year had been analyzed by a team of forensic accountants. She knew, he muttered to the empty room, his voice breaking under the weight of the realization. She knew the whole time. He stood up and walked over to the desk, noticing for the first time a heavy envelope that the motel clerk had handed him when he checked in, claiming it had been dropped off by a courier just 10 minutes before his arrival. He tore open the red wax seal, his fingers shaking as he pulled out a thick stack of glossy financial photographs and bank routing numbers. The documents didn't show his hidden bank accounts. They showed Chloe's secret accounts, the ones she had opened in her own mother's name over a year ago. The photographs showed Chloe meeting with Julian's biggest professional rival, the managing partner of a competing firm, handing him a flash drive filled with Julian's confidential client lists. Julian stared at the photos, his mind refusing to accept what his eyes were seeing, realizing that his loyal mistress had been selling his trade secrets to his enemy the entire time they were together. She hadn't fallen in love with his charm or his legal mind. She had been hired by a competitor to destroy his standing at his firm from the inside out. The final page of the envelope was a short, typed note from me, containing no signature, but a message that cut deeper than any legal brief ever could. It read, "You thought you were playing chess with me, Julian, but you didn't even notice that Chloe was playing a completely different game with you." He dropped the papers onto the desk, the realization hitting him like a physical blow that he was completely alone, caught between a wife who despised him and a mistress who had used him. The betrayal goes deeper than Julian ever could have imagined, proving that everyone around him had an agenda of their own. Do you think Julian should try to fight back, or should he just sign the papers and walk away with whatever dignity he has left? 3 weeks later, the air-conditioned conference room on the 42nd floor of the city's most prestigious skyscraper was completely silent as the court reporter finished setting up her machine. Julian sat on one side of the long glass table, wearing a wrinkled suit he had bought off the rack, looking a decade older than he had on the night at the steakhouse. I sat across from him, dressed in a sharp navy blue blazer, my hands folded neatly on the table right next to the small voice recorder that was currently deactivated but ready to capture every word. My lawyer rubbed his temples, adjusting a thick stack of manila folders that contained the final, unalterable terms of our divorce settlement. Julian's attorney leaned over, whispering that they should sign the agreement immediately without opening the record, warning his client that any attempt to litigate would result in a criminal referral for corporate tax fraud. Julian didn't listen. He looked directly at me, his eyes desperate for any sign of the woman who used to cook him dinner and listen to him talk about his court cases. "Why did you go this far, Victoria?" he asked, his voice tightening as he ignored his lawyer's hand on his sleeve. "You didn't just want a divorce. You wanted to completely erase my entire life, to leave me with nothing but a reputation I can never repair." I looked at him, my expression completely serene, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing anger or resentment in my eyes. I reached out and gently slid the thick settlement document across the polished glass table, pointing to the line where his signature was required to finalize the transfer of his remaining partnership shares. "You chose to rewrite our history the moment you took my grandmother's ring, Julian," I said softly, my voice perfectly steady. "I just chose to write the final chapter before you could finish your lie." He took the heavy silver pen from his pocket, the same pen I had seen him with at the restaurant, and slowly traced his signature on the dotted line, his hand trembling as he gave up every single asset he had spent his life accumulating. As soon as he finished the last stroke, I slid my own gold wedding band off my finger and placed it quietly on top of the signed contract. Julian looked at the ring, then back up at me, a sudden realization appearing in his eyes as he noticed that Chloe wasn't sitting in the waiting room outside to support him. He asked where she was, wondering why she hadn't answered his calls for the past 48 hours, assuming she was just hiding from the legal fallout. My lawyer let out a quiet laugh, pulling one final document from his briefcase and sliding it across the table toward Julian's stunned attorney. It was a copy of a non-disclosure agreement and a wire transfer receipt from my private account showing a substantial payment made to Chloe's mother's account 2 days ago. Chloe hadn't been hired by his rival to destroy his career. She had been working for me since the very beginning, acting out a part in a script I had written the moment I discovered his initial financial discrepancies. She had leaked the client list because I told her to, ensuring that his firm would drop him immediately without me having to spend a single dollar on a prolonged corporate lawsuit. Julian sat back in his chair, his jaw dropping as the absolute scale of the deception washed over him, realizing that the mistress he thought he controlled was just another tool I used to dismantle his arrogance. I stood up, picking up my handbag and my sunglasses from the table, not giving him another second of my time as I prepared to walk out into my new life. He sat there completely frozen, a man who made his living using words, completely unable to find a single sentence to defend his broken pride. As I reached the door, I turned back one last time, looking at the empty glass table and the broken man sitting beside it, knowing that his silence was the greatest victory I could have ever asked for. The door clicked shut behind me, leaving him alone in the high-rise office with nothing but the consequences of his own choices. Silence can be the most powerful weapon when dealing with a betrayer who thinks they can outsmart everyone. Do you think Victoria's long game was the ultimate masterclass in revenge?